Hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video we're going to take a look at creating a landscape painting with watercolor. Now this particular video will walk you through the process, and I'm going to cover the crucial steps of the process of creating this painting. This video is comprised of excerpts from our recent class series available for members at thevirtualinstructor.com entitled Old Barn with Watercolor. In this class series, I'll walk artists through the entire process, including all the steps of creating this watercolor painting. This class series features 7 videos and is over 2 hours long. If you want to learn more about this series or purchase this series yourself, I'll leave a link in the description below and also a coupon code where you can get 20% off this course. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the process of creating a watercolor landscape painting. For this painting, we'll be working on Stonehenge 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. I'll also be sketching things out with a HB graphite pencil. This is a Staedtler lead holder. And I'll be using a kneaded eraser to lift up some of the graphite to make my graphite sketch a little bit lighter. And I'll be using Winsor & Newton Professional watercolors. This is my 18-tube set. And I'll also be using a bit of Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache for some of the finishing touches. We'll use an assortment of brushes, including a sumi brush and a few smaller round brushes for our watercolor applications. We'll begin here by lightly sketching out the contours of our subject using an HB graphite pencil. It's important that you use a light touch when you're creating your graphite sketch. You don't want to put any indentations in the surface of the paper, which could cause some issues when watercolor applications are later applied to the surface. Be sure that you don't get too stiff with your pencil applications because this can lead to darker lines or lines that are difficult to erase later in the process. I'm going to go ahead and draw some lines to indicate the shapes of the shadows that exist on the left side of this building. These shadows are going to be incredibly important in creating the illusion of light within the scene. I'll add a few indications of some of the branches that overlap the building in the foreground. Now, these are light and loose and just a suggestion of what we're going to develop later in the process. Now, again, it's completely up to you how much detail you include in your initial graphite sketch and also how much pressure you put on the pencil. Some of you may prefer to not see any visible graphite lines in the final image that you create here, and some of you are okay with seeing some of those graphite lines. It's completely up to you how much pressure you put on the pencil and how much detail you include in your initial sketch. We'll first begin by using a sumi brush to apply water to the entire surface. Using a smaller sumi brush, I'm going to pull out a bit of cerulean blue to the palette. We're going to start with our sky and then work down the picture plane with our initial light washes. I'm also going to grab just a touch of Winsor blue, which is very similar to ultramarine, and then mix the Winsor blue and the cerulean blue together. So essentially, in order to paint the clouds here, we're basically painting the shapes that exist in between the shapes of the clouds. We'll also use this same light mixture on the roof where we see some snow in this area. Essentially here we're starting with lighter values, and progressively throughout the painting we'll start darkening these values, increasing the contrast. This of course is how we want to approach a watercolor painting, since we're relying on the white of the paper to create our tints or lighter values. And as we continue with these light washes, even though they're still very light, we are starting to broaden the range of value. Value, of course, is the darkness or lightness of color. It's one of the 7 elements of art. And value, it's important to note, is relative. This means that we recognize values based on the values that surround them. So as we're just gradually getting slightly darker with our applications, we can see that the areas where we applied that light blue application and the snow in the foreground is starting to appear more white, but it's not white. It does have a little bit of hue associated with it. As you can see here, I'm adding just a bit of burnt sienna to some of these distant trees. This will add variety in the color and add more depth to our color as well. What we're focusing on essentially are the lighter values or tints of the colors in each section that we're addressing. Now, these colors, although our mixtures are relatively dark, we're applying the color with a lot of water, and that is essentially adding white to the color. I know it's not adding white technically, but the more you thin out the paint, the more of the white of the paper shows through, and the result is a tint of the color. We'll add a bit of our burnt sienna and yellow ochre mixture with just a touch of the lamp black to tone it down a bit. And then we'll add a light wash over the front-facing side of this building. We'll also start to put some hints of shadow that's produced by the small little pieces of grass here that are going to be so essential to pulling our viewer into the middle portion of the composition. We'll add a few distant, smaller trees that are a little bit closer to the viewer where we can see some of the branches and things. And we'll also add that building that's off in the distance as well. These little sections of the painting, although they don't take up a lot of the picture plane, they are still very important in creating the illusion of space. So it's important not to omit these distant areas that exist here in the middle ground. Now we're going to grab a little bit of Winsor blue. This is the green shade of blue. And we'll add just a touch of lamp black. You can see how strong that lamp black is when we add it. And a bit of Payne's gray, which is definitely a cooler gray. This is going to produce a nice, rich, bluish shadow color. And we'll go ahead and add that on the left side of the building where we have that area of cast shadow in the snow. We'll go back to the palette and add a little bit more burnt sienna in, making this color a little bit more intense, and then a touch of lamp black. And again, I can't get over how strong black is and how much it changes the color so quickly. This gives us a nice, rich, dark brown. And then we'll start creating the shadow on the side of the building away from the light. We'll bring this color down using vertical strokes. And then as we get to the area where the plant overlaps this shadowed area, we'll leave some open areas again as we concentrate on painting the shadows in between. We'll continue to just gradually work our way across, patiently making these marks. Again, leaving open areas in between. That'll give us the impression of these slats being separate boards. And at this point, I see that I need to go back and intensify some of the reds of the faded paint here. So again, this is burnt sienna. There is a little bit of Winsor red mixed into this as well. So if you don't have Winsor red, it's going to be very closely related to cadmium red. Now using that same dark mixture, we're going to add a cast shadow on the side of the building underneath the overhanging roof. And we'll just wash right over the top of the area that we've already applied paint. Now this area, of course, is completely dry, so some of the colors underneath are going to show through. We shouldn't lose the texture here, and we shouldn't really lose the color either. Instead, we should just be making an area of shadow that's darker. Progressively, we'll allow our mixture of watercolor to be more pigment rich, meaning we'll use less and less water. This will result in more intense color and also darker applications. By doing this, we create the illusion of some of the branches overlapping each other. Some branches are receiving more light from the light source, while others are more in shadow. It's important to be patient, obviously. Take your time. Don't try to rush this process. At this point, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of a stronger shadow along the base of the building where we're seeing some cracks in some of the boards and things. We'll go ahead and darken up the shadow on the left side of this little structure up here. This kind of looks like a chimney. I'm not sure what it is, but it doesn't matter. We're just focusing on the shapes of value that we see. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of the Payne's Gray. And we're also going to grab just a bit of the Winsor Blue with the green shade. And we're going to enhance these shadows on the rooftop. Don't be afraid to allow this blue to be a little bit bolder than what you see in the reference. This will create some color contrast between some of the oranges that are around it. And there's definitely some variety in the dark values that we see, or I should say the variety in the shape of the dark values that we see in this particular section. So we're paying attention to the reference photo to try to match those shapes as best as possible. And then we'll work up back to the top appendage of our second building. Again, enhancing the shadow, adding some indication of some texture here as we gradually fill in a variety of different values up here, darker values. They're all pretty dark, but we still are going to have some variety in there. So using a fine tip round brush with just a very tiny amount of water, we'll go ahead and pull some of these lines down. This brush has barely any paint in it at all, just enough to make a few faint lines here. We'll add a bit of variety to our board at the top, and then we'll add a little bit of cast shadow here on the window frames or around the window frame on the lower portion. Then we'll go ahead and darken up the opening here on the window at the bottom. Again, this is mostly Payne's Gray with a touch of lamp black. This creates a very nice dark value that still has a little bit of color associated with it, so it's not quite as flat. And then once our initial application of the shadow has dried completely, we can go back and darken it if need be. I always like to be cautious with these applications and start with lighter applications, knowing that I can always go darker if need be. All right, let's add some of the grassy plants that exist in front of this building. So it's back to the burnt sienna mixture. Again, this is a very dark brown that we've created, and we'll start pulling up some of the strokes here. And again, we don't have to spell everything out. We can use the brush to create a variety of different textures and some more wispy marks here to create the illusion of this grass. Now I'm going to go back to our snow shadow color here. Again, this is the Winsor Blue, the green shade of Winsor Blue with a bit of Payne's Gray. And we're going to enhance some of these shadows in the foreground. Preparing our palette for gouache. Gouache is opaque watercolor. I'm going to be using Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache for this. And I'm going to be using 3 colors: burnt umber, yellow ochre, and then titanium white. These are the colors that we're going to use to make our little grass blades. Now we'll turn our attention to the smaller grass blades here in the foreground. Now, this process is a pretty straightforward, simple process, but it does require a bit of patience. So take your time here as you develop these little small grass blades. Make sure that your brush has enough water in it so that you can make a smooth, even application, but make sure it's not overly loaded with water where your color is just going to bleed on the surface. So you might want to use a test strip of paper. I often do that with gouache. And we'll go back underneath some of these grassy collections and make the shadow a little stronger here. That's going to further the illusion of the light source and add a little bit more depth here. And after we've removed all the tape, we can erase any graphite lines that remain using a kneaded eraser. And now our landscape painting, completed with watercolor, is complete. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were able to pick up a couple of things here and there. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so you're notified when new videos like this are uploaded. And of course, if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to the next level, you need to check out the membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. The class series that we just discussed is part of the membership program, as well as the rest of our courses, classes, weekly live lessons, weekly critiques, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. If you want to learn more about our program and start your free trial today, I'll leave a link in the description below, or you can just take a photograph of the QR code on your screen right now. Also, if you want to just check out a few of our course videos and ebooks for free, there's a link in the description below for that as well. That'll put you on our mailing list so I can send you tons of free art lessons. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.